Hello. Today, I want to talk to you about Joe Biden's upcoming summit for democracy. The Chinese say it's already failed. It's already a farce. Are they right? And the answer, sadly, is yes. This has failed before it started. We've had Joe Biden earlier this year referring to America's ally, America's friend in on the border of China, and that was President Ashraf Ghani. Biden refused, or he perhaps even spoke. But the fact is, he called him Mr. Ghani, though the man has a doctorate, he's a professor, say Dr. Ghani. No, he said Mr. Ghani. He didn't say President Ghani. He referred to Kamala Harris as Vice President because we hadn't. She's a woman and she's a bit black. But Ghani is just Mr. Ghani. It's not the president. And of course, the result of this very ill-advised broadcast by the American president was that the Taliban and other people in the region, they said, well, if America doesn't regard Ghani as president, who is running the show? We know Ghani. He's an expert on failed states. He's an academic who's written a book about failed states. And then he became the president of a failed state because the Americans wanted him in, so as to ensure that the state would fail, because they actually brought in an expert in failed states to make sure that the thing would fail. And it failed. So it was a ludicrous situation. And then, Biden went crazy and he started saying, oh, my son Bo, who didn't die in Afghanistan or Iraq or anywhere else, he died, elsewhere for some other reason. My son Bo! And now what has Biden been up to? He previously said, there'll be a summit for democracy. But is this really a summit for democracy? And the answer is no. You've left out Bangladesh, which is democratic. You have Sheikh Hasina, who is the daughter of Mujibur Rahman. But Mujibur Rahman was not liked by Kissinger and Nixon because he defied, what was in America's interest. Because he somehow, for some reason, he objected to Punjabis and Pathans, soldiers, raping and killing his people, who are Bengali. And America quite deliberately precipitated a massive famine in that country. It was a democracy. And the excuse they gave was that they said, well, you see, Mujibur Rahman is selling jute jute is a fiber to Cuba. So in they let 1 million people die, even though Bangladesh was a democracy with a free press and so forth. And even today, it is not the army which runs Bangladesh, it is a woman, Sheikh Hasina. She may be quite tough, just as Mamata Banerjee is pretty tough in West Bengal. The communists, she threw out the communists. Essentially, but, she's been pretty good at, her people have been really good at beating the communists. Because, communist rule is actually a thugocracy. There's a bunch of thugs beating and raping and, but TMC, Mamata's people, are better at beating and so on. And Sheikh Hasina, I'm sure, no doubt, there are influential, or rather, very respectable Bangladeshi people who have some complaints against her regime. But the fact is that Bangladesh has, at first it overtook Pakistan, now it's overtaking India economically. It is a great Islamic republic where the population growth has been contained. You've had pretty much demographic transition. Bangladesh used to be much more populous than Pakistan. It used to be very much poorer, maybe 40% of the GDP per capita. Now it is richer than Pakistan. It has a stable demographic profile and a higher per capita income, certainly than West Bengal, certainly than Pakistan. It's stable, it's democratic, because there can be no doubt that Sheikh Hasina is a very popular leader. Her father was the definition of a popular leader. And of course, he was assassinated. Entire family was killed back in 1975, I think it was, or 1904 or 1975, 75, I think. And Bangladesh did suffer quite a lot with military coup and counter coup and this and that. And it's a very stable country. And you can say, well, it isn't quite a democracy. And of course, you can say that about any country. But Bangladesh has not been invited. Pakistan has. And the Chinese are laughing all the way to the bank. The Chinese are saying, look, you have a summit where our best friend, Pakistan, which has actually defeated America in Afghanistan, which sheltered Osama bin Laden, which sponsored terrorism, that country, yes, it received a lot of money from America, but the Americans also killed a lot of people in Pakistan. It's like when you take money from America, they come and they kill your people. That's their idea of democracy. And you have Pakistan is invited. Sri Lanka is not invited. Sri Lanka got universal suffrage in 1930. America really only gave the vote to black people in many parts of that country, in some parts of that country, I should say, after 1965. Sri Lanka, 1930. And in fact, France gave women the vote 15 years after Sri Lanka. Which country is more democratic? I'm not saying Sri Lanka is perfect. Of course, I'm a Tamil. But Tamil people want Sri Lanka to do well. For God's sake. And the truth is, if it comes down to religion, the head of the Tamil Tigers was Christian, or Bakaran was Christian. He's not a Hindu. Rajapaksha was most welcome into Guruvayur temple, but his wife was Christian. So there was a question about her. They said, no, but, with the husband. You see, Buddhists and Hindus, we've always gone to each other's. In India, it's the same religion because, if you're like really smart and you're Brahmin or your other high caste, one avenue of really enjoying the life of the mind and having a better life was to become a Buddhist monk. And, it wasn't that strict. You could do 20 years of education and then, so you're almost a monk or, you are in monastic clothes. But then, daddy calls you home and says, get married, we've got enough land. So, it was just, Buddhism was higher education. Jainism, very similar. Jainism still survives. And of course, Buddhism is now hugely revived, mainly because Brahmins were so attracted to it. Acharya Kosambi, Brahmin, but also Kaias, Rahul Sankirtan, and then highly educated Mahars like Dr. Ambedkar Saab. So really, there is no issue here. So what has America done? Well, basically, it's taken Pakistan, which is basically Imran Khan is a puppet of the army. Everybody else was jailed. That's a democracy. Sheikh Hasina, not a democracy. But Imran Khan has been celebrating the Taliban's victory. He's the guy who, because he's Maktoum, he made his name on that basis. That Pakistan has defeated America. It was Pakistan which sponsored the Taliban um, in Afghanistan, and now 20 years later they've won. General Hamid Gul, who was an ISI, the Pakistani ISI, the inter-service agency, which was it sponsored, it created. Well, I mean, there was a spontaneous element to the Taliban, but this is a Pakistani creation. And of course, back then, the Pakistanis, they have superb diplomats. They were taking the American money, and for example, the Taliban ambassador to Pakistan, they took the money and they shipped him off to Guantanamo Bay. But, forgive and forget, because then they'd say, no, but look, we sheltered Osama. You couldn't shelter Osama. We did in Abbottabad. Right, the army did. It's a cantonment town. So, hey. And the other thing is that after the, Obama, President Obama, after he sanctioned that raid, and he knew very well that this is the end of his AFPAC strategy, because the Pakistanis will never forget this. And in fact, back then, that's when any pro-American element in the military or ISI, it was purged. So really, for 8 years, you can't say that there is a single person within the Pakistani deep state who is American, who's pro-American or a proxy for them. But Biden, he's committed to that old, he's a geriatric fool. He's bumbling around. And Kamala Harris, of course, has turned out to be utterly useless. She's, Julia Dreyfus in the sitcom Veep. She makes Julia Dreyfus look highly professional and competent. She's completely incompetent. And, of course, she's, from the Indian point of view, she's extremely anti-Indian, So, but the problem is that African Americans, the genuine African Americans, her father is Afro-Caribbean, and his family owned slaves. Because in the Caribbean, people who, under the one-drop rule, were regarded as black in America, but under the British sovereignty, they could own slaves because you didn't have a one-drop rule in the British colonies. These are slave owners. Her father comes from a slave-owning family. Of course, some of them were descended, some of that ancestry is slave, but it's also slave owner. And the fact is, as a family, these are slave owners. It's not the same thing as the African American. Her father's a lovely chap. He's a British type, left-wing Cambridge economist. Nothing wrong with him at all. But he's not part of the American mainstream at all. There's nothing to do with Roland Fryer, with the inner city, with the Great Migration, and now the Great Exodus from Detroit and Chicago and so on. Completely unconnected with African Americans. Now, Obama, it's quite true. His father was actually African, wasn't really African American at all. But he left Hawaii and he went to Chicago and he was a community organizer. He was learning. And he married Michelle, and, so he's African American by adoption and by study. But it's that old Chicago machine which pushed him forward. So there's really nothing behind him. And we know that. But he's a nice guy. And if there's problems in that marriage and so forth, then it's because of the frustration of the genuine African American with the ersatz. It's like he's cooked up in a test tube. His mother is an anthropologist, and his father's from Kenya, from the Luo tribe. And I remember my father knew his father, and he was a terrible drunkard. And he used to beat his. He used to beat the white wives. He didn't beat the black wives because the black wives were bloody kicked his. He was a short man. He wasn't good looking and tall like President Obama. Well, I think President Obama is very conscious of that, the nasty side, the drinking and the, very conscious, very, very conscious. And, Michelle for president, yeah, that's African American. But the thing is, in a country where, 12-14% are African American, not a good idea. That is simply too narrow. You need people from the majority. Biden, is majority, but he's senile. He is the last, he's the first and the last silent generation president. You've heard of the baby boomers. He's actually before the baby boomers. You've had three baby boomer presidents. Clinton, Bush, Trump, all born in 1946, if that's right. Yeah. So Clinton, George W. and Trump, all born in the same year. Obama also qualifies as a boomer. In fact, I do as well, because it goes up to 1964. But Biden qualifies as silent generation. So you have the greatest generation, which produced many presidents, and then you have the silent generation, which produced no presidents at all, until you have Biden. And when Biden opens his mouth, he's a lovely, lovely bloke, but he gave away Afghanistan the moment he opened his mouth and he said, Mr. Ghani, not President Ghani. It's an extraordinary. The extraordinary thing is, it is quite usual for a president to misspeak or for an official to misspeak. And what the White House always does is that it issues a correction. It says, the president, of course, is so close to Mr. Ghani, Dr. Ghani, or whatever, he misspoke. Or you say the teleprompter, something. They didn't even bother. Now, with this Summit for Democracy, you have a recipe to defeat any claim by the White House, by America, to represent democracy. That is out of the window, because some of the people that you've invited are not just not democratic. They sponsored terrorism. Pakistan. How did North Korea get the nuclear bomb? We know. It's the Americans say that the father, A.Q. Khan, who just died, passed away recently, received, the same people who sheltered Osama bin Laden also sheltered the guy, A.Q. Khan, who gave North Korea the bomb. 20 years. Everybody knows this. But America will still give money to Pakistan because America is stupid. Obama said our foreign policy, when he was re-elected a couple of years into his second term, he was in the presidential plane, Air Force One, and the press are at the back. He went out to meet the press, and he said American foreign policy consists of doing stupid shit. Our new policy is not to do stupid shit. And he actually returned and he said the same thing twice. But then yeah, stupider and stupider shit happened. And Trump was actually rolling back on that. Trump's a businessman. He's not part of the foreign policy establishment and so on. Chaotic administration, quite true. But and Biden's administration is not nearly as chaotic at the moment so far. But Kamala Harris, chaotic. The African Americans in her office are quitting. They're saying she's a bully, she's stupid, she's just, she is Sarah Palin. Not as pale as Palin, but she's certainly not African American. And that's a fact. She may have gone to an African American church or whatever, but she just isn't what she's supposed to be. And I can really understand this because I know the kind of people from Jamaica who we call mixed race, let's face it. Yeah. They were the bourgeoisie. They're the people who were more British than the British. And they hate reggae and what's called Rudwai and, all the things which are ganja. Like her dad goes, ganja is brought to us by the Indians. It's not us. And he's right. And I know them. They're lovely people. And of course, they do extremely well. But they're like those Protestant Irish people who they'd learned Gaelic, but they had great contempt for the ordinary Paddy or Mickey Murphy and likes his pint of Guinness, and they had contempt for them. Colin Powell, a lovely chap, but again, but he had the wisdom. He knew, look, I'm Jamaican of a particular class. He's from the same class as many other very successful professionals. It's not an African American class. It's an Afro-Caribbean caste, high caste Afro-Caribbean. And it's got nothing to do with the urban experience. It's got nothing to do with the Great Migration. It's got nothing to do with African Americans. Kamala Harris was probably one of the few Democrats who, when she was first running for office, she got donations from Donald Trump and his daughter. They contributed to her. Is she, she's supposed to be Indian, but Indians hate her. Why? Because her niece or something, who looks white and is white, and tweets all sorts of shit. And she's just she's a nothing person. And in Tamil Nadu, which is where she's from, she's a Brahmin. Tamil Nadu politics for the last 50 years has been about, we hate Brahmins. And the rest of India is kind of going, we're not particularly fond of Tamil people who are Christians, because what do they have in common with the rest of us? We like Christians, and we'd especially like to go to a Christian school or college, because excellent education. But we speak Hindi, or we speak Indo-Aryan languages, and so who supports her? And the answer is nobody. African Americans go, she's not one of us. And this is the whole problem with Biden, that it's a tokenism. Of course, he is a very practical politician, and he knew that by getting in a vice president who is completely unelectable and completely incompetent and completely unappealing because of his age, he is safe from impeachment. Because nobody in their right mind would want to get rid of Biden and put in uh, uh, the completely useless Kamala Harris. And who's the next? The guy, Buttigieg, or whatever his name is. I think his father wrote something about Gramsci. So, gay guy whose daddy was a Gramscian leftist. Electable? No. Fuck off. So, Biden knows his stuff. The thing is that Biden is senile. Weeping about, oh, bo, and, Reagan boycotted the Moscow Olympics. And Biden says, no, we will boycott diplomatically. So, in other words, and China is laughing its head off. Because obviously that means that, because they won't have any diplomatic representation, that means China will stick it at every point to America, and America can do nothing because diplomatically it's saying, no, it's not happening. We're looking over there. And this summit, this democratic summit, it's a gift. If you look at what is India doing, India is and Putin. India is playing up, and Russia is playing up the Putin-Modi meeting. And it was India has a very long friendship with with Moscow. But the way that both sides are playing it up, it sends a clear message that India is opting out of the Indian Ocean strategy. Why? Because America is completely shit. America did a deal with Australia, which pissed off the French. But the French are important because the French can give you, these new type of thorium-based reactors. They're doing some interesting things. America's shit. Their engineering is shit. Manmohan Singh put his head on the line to support a 1-2-3 deal with Americans. There is not one single U.S. nuclear power station in India to this date. It was useless. I mean, it was okay. It's like in the past, you had to play along with them to get into the nuclear supply group, or to get this, or to get that, or the missile group, and so on. Yeah. But that type of diplomacy now looks catastrophically wrong. Because if Taiwan hadn't joined that missile group and this group and that group, like North Korea, they'd have, they'd have nukes and delivery systems, and they'd be safe. So instead, what is the summit going to do? The summit is about, Taiwan is a democracy, but how long will it remain a democracy? The answer is, you say the Taiwanese now know that America is shit. In the old days, if you had an American base on your territory, it gave you protection. But the Biden doctrine is, if we have a base on your territory, it's up to you to make sure all our boys are sleeping peacefully, and you must surrender anything and everything till we get our boys out. They're useless because each of those boys is my little boy Biden. My little boy Bo. Bo. Oh, I cry about Bo. bastard is a worthless piece of shit. Look at his other son. Why should we imagine that Bo was something very different or very special? This is a man of this silent generation. He was born just on the cusp of America's top, America's turn away from isolationism. That was when he was born. And over his long life, he has done nothing good. He really represents, he comes into uh, Congress at precisely the moment when you have the Southern strategy, when you have the pushback against what was happening in the 60s, against civil rights and so on. This is what he's associated with. Kamala Harris, so, how did she get her break? She slept with a genuine African American, very handsome. Yeah, that's all right. Nothing wrong with that. It's not Monica Lewinsky. She did have a law degree. But, that's not exactly rising up from the ghetto and, like fighting the man. It's going to college, sleeping with a man who may have fought the man before. And, the guy actually said, he's a nice guy, and, corrupt and so on. Yeah. He said, look, she shouldn't go for Veep. She should, because he wanted her to do well. But the other side of it is, I guess she could have done well in anything. If you actually look at her as a prosecutor and so on, shit. She just doesn't have it up there. This is the problem with tokenism. And I think Biden, you can't spend so long in politics without developing a survival instinct. The problem is that at his age, he should be thinking of the future of the Democratic Party. He has chosen somebody viable. He hasn't done so. And he's, this is what the White House and Biden is going to do. It's booty cake. Are you kidding me? I'm sorry, I mispronounced the name. Yeah, and Summit for Democracy. This is a summit which ought to say to America, you've never supported democracy, you weren't really democratic, you're shit, fuck off. And this, the Chinese have already said it. And it's sad that, Putin basically is saying to India, listen, guys, we're going to sort this out with the Chinese just as we did before. Because, there is no real, it's two bald men fighting over a comb kind of thing. But the Indians feel they can win because they feel that the Chinese soldiers will run away. It's true. The problems that Xi faces is that his army is shit. The soldiers will run away. And for a good reason. It's because that country is getting richer and richer, while the fact is that his Belt and Road is going to bring in, what can it bring in except immigrants? And those immigrants are going to challenge Han hegemony. They're going to challenge. It's a demographic time bomb. But rather than indulging in Schadenfreude over a possible future scenario for China, which they can avert, they're smart people, we have to look at America, which is definitely full of smart people. But just gone on doing stupid shit, virtue signaling, believing their own, getting high on their own supply, and just uh, doing crazy nonsense. And is that going to change? The answer is yeah. Under Biden, it's going to change. They're going to talk stupid shit. When your president talks such stupid shit, and the immediate consequence is that America suffers, then the Americans sort of go, fuck the rest of the world. We have terrible leadership. Let's look at our local representatives and, you know, make sure that there's no more virtue signaling and tokenism and critical race stupidity, and, you know, let's at the local level make things better for us. And when America does that, it always succeeds. That's the point about democracy. that people know about their own neighborhood. They don't know shit about Afghanistan or China or whatever. So stop talking about faraway places. Stop talking about universal rights and women's rights and, you know, fuck that. You don't know what's happening over here or over there. You do know what's happening in your neighborhood. Democracy is about subsidiarity. Decisions being made as close to those whom it affects as possible. But they must also pay for it. No taxation without representation. Equally, no taxes legitimate unless the people who pay for it decide how that money will be spent. I know I sound like a bloody Ayn Rand type nutter, which I'm not. I'm a socialist. I'm very proud to be a socialist, just as I am very proud to be a Chinese woman with big tits, huge tits, hairy tits. I will now show you my hairy Chinese nipples. Bastards! You're sexually exploiting me. The only reason you turn in, watch my YouTube videos is because of that, right? Aren't you ashamed of yourselves? I'm talking to you, Mum. I know the only people who follow me on my blog and on my YouTube account, it's you. I'm not saying that you watch the whole thing, but if you know, if that's why I put these things at the end. Anyway, Merry Christmas. This is an official message from the Institute of Social Proctology.